Hello and welcome to this episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV, where we are looking at an issue that is a bit futuristic. It's about the weaponization and the militarization of space and its consequences for India. And we have two informed experts as always. We have with us Lieutenant General PGS Pannu, who was a pioneer in military circles for looking at the Space Agency Initiative of India, also the Defense Cybersecurity Agencies, and conducted the first ever conference on space-related issues for the armed forces. And we have a person who needs little introduction, both in military and non-military circles. We have Dr. Manoj Joshi, eminent academic now, author of several well-regarded books, and a former editor of a major broadsheet and an analyst par excellence. So, Dr. Joshi sir, I'll start with you with respect to your seniority. There is a lot of concern about how rapidly China is militarizing space. It has most recently physically moved a disabled Chinese satellite and put it into another orbit. Earlier, only the Americans had that capacity. Then, equally important is its latest demonstration of a number of initiatives in space, satellite, and the kind of impact it could have on planning and assessment for military operations. Your view, sir?
Well, certainly there is no doubt that the Chinese have taken a large number of steps. One is the concept of space itself, the utilization of space. I mean, you use for observation, for communication, for timing purposes. But then there is the concept of counter space. Counter space is something which we have seen tested in these so-called ASAT tests, where you've knocked out a satellite in space. That's just one of those. The others is what you have just mentioned. That is the ability to come close to another satellite and pick it up, have a robotic arm or something to pick it up. So now, theoretically, countries say we are doing that because we'll repair our satellites. But if you can repair the satellite, you can also fling it away. So the use of this robotic kind of system, or you can actually approach another satellite and detonate yourself next to it. So there are many, because space is so important from the point of view of defense, that all countries have plans, but because of rules and regulations, the ban on militarization of outer space, there are some, no one wants to actually openly say that they are doing this, but everyone is doing it. Anyone which has, state which has the capacity.
So, there is obviously a recognition that this is a very important area, that very important space, that space can be used in a variety of ways, gathering intelligence, altering the course of battle, assessing the ability of the other power to really have long-reaching impact. General Pannu, I want to understand from you that, as a consequence of an understanding that space is very important, we've started setting up a number of agencies, and you've been a pioneer in helping set up some of those dedicated military institutions which could be on par with Russia's Aerospace Defense Forces, China's PLA Strategic Support Force, the USS Space Force. So, one is setting up the institutions. Two is quickly making them effective. Because I find one of the problems when we set up institutions is that it takes a while before the legislations come into place which allow efficacy to these institutions. Your view?
Maruf, historically in India, ISRO as an organization has remained the foremost entity under the Department of Space, which ran all the programs which are space related. But also what happened was, under the Department of Space, it participated, it also is a regulator, and it also goes into the business of space. So as a result, when you are a regulator and you are a performer and you are into the business, nobody else really comes in. But there is a big change which has happened with the Prime Minister's initiative, that he has built in space where ecosystem, where large private players will come in. They will not only use the research facilities of the ISRO, but also create an ecosystem where they will be able to contribute, build their indigenous systems, and perform in a manner where both military as well as civil applications, both, because after all, in the space domain, most of the systems can be put to dual use. So as a result, I think the Defense Space Agency, which has come in, parallelly, the DRDO has also created a research organization which deals with the space, and also with assistance of ISRO. I think there is a larger ecosystem which has come in, and I think which is extremely important for militarization, as also to counter any militarized or any offensive by any other country in the world as far as the space is concerned.
Okay. So you referred to China, Russia, everybody else. There is a report, Dr. Joshi sir, of the US Defense Intelligence Agency. It's titled Challenges to Security in Space. And again, they seem to be very concerned about China's emergence as a space power, the resurgence of Russia in the space domain, and it is talking about how China and Russia are developing systems to reduce their reliance on US-based GPS systems and other space technologies, and fielding increasingly sophisticated ASAT systems. Your views?
Yeah, but certainly, as I explained, that the space is critical for the battlefield on Earth.
Yes.
And if it's critical for the battlefield on Earth, you can be sure that in any conflict between two powers of, let's say, like China, US, Russia, or something like that, the first thing that will be targeted will be satellites.
Okay.
So you have to have a certain resilience in your system. So not, for example, like GPS. Now GPS is used for navigation, of course, but also for targeting, meaning your missiles have GPS data in it for targeting. So now you need to have systems which the adversary will target your satellites, so you should be able to launch fresh satellites. You should have almost, when I say resilience, it means you must have your own launch capacity. And that's why when General Saab spoke about Defense Space Agency, I said that India is very laggard in this. We can't afford to have our defense system depend on the ISRO or the DRDO. Someone you need to. It's like your own. You need to have your own launch facilities, your own launch capabilities, and a completely different kind of a setup.
Basically, a vertical within the Ministry of Defense and the armed forces.
It is a part of the battle, your order of battle in the armed forces, because as I said, the other guy is going to target your satellites immediately. You need to replace those satellites or do something to his satellites, So there's a battlefield shaping up out there in space, and you need to have the organization on the ground here ready for that.
Okay. General Pannu, you're talking about India. Something that had struck me that, India set up its initiatives from around 2010 onwards. But there is an assertion from the Indian government that unambiguously states that India's aim of developing these capabilities like ASAT are only as a deterrent and not as offensive ASAT capabilities preempted in the event of a conflict to be used against whoever decides to use those capabilities against us in a conflict. For long we have looked at conflict only in terms of land forces, air force, and maximum the Navy. But suddenly you find all of them are in their place. We seem to have more or less the necessary defensive posturings in place. But here is an element that's come in that completely puts us in a disadvantage, your view.
You know, you spoke about the Army, Navy, Air Force. Actually, space is called the fourth frontier in warfare. If you look at the fourth frontier, and you having a solid Army background, and you know the importance of the high ground. A person who occupies the high ground can operate very well and also can target better. Space is the ultimate high ground. And where the terrestrial deterrence is now no more a deterrence, because really speaking, it gets checkmated. And space being a global common, literally speaking, a lot of military assets have gradually started shifting into the space, because A, you get unnoticed because nobody knows what you're launching into the space. But anybody who has the ability to launch in the space can watch the world and also can target the world. A lot of economy has shifted into the space because it is the terrestrial and the non-terrestrial, that is the space, which is going to become one web. It is going to be a network of networks. It is going to be a system of systems as one. So anybody who can destroy the country's specific satellite constellation can also destroy the economy of the country. So as a result, that is the first step in which the nations who are in space needs to protect their space assets. That is extremely important. But to protect your space assets, one is protection from hardening your assets, and second thing is to make sure that you have a counter to it. As a result, when you have a deterrence and you have the ASAT capabilities, you know that you have a second strike capability. So anybody who strikes at you, they should know that there is a deterrence, that there's somebody else can have a second strike at you. And I think that is precisely what the Indian government is looking at.
Okay, so very well put. I mean, very comprehensive. That makes the entire turf much bigger than we started looking at least I started looking at. Dr. Joshi, sir, you know, going back to this US report, which has talked about challenges of security in space, it also talks about how China and Russia's space warfare doctrines have shown that China views counter space operations as a means to deter US intervention in Taiwan. And Russia views space as a critical enabler of American force projection and strike capabilities, and these capabilities could put some kind of a check on Russia's ambitions, as we are seeing in Ukraine, maybe tomorrow somewhere else. Your view, sir?
You know, the thing is that, Maruf, right now, a lot of these kind of satellites, you know, we are talking about, and the ASAT capability and all, really relate to the low Earth orbit. Okay, so 700, 800 kilometers and you knock that guy out. But the point is that the US, and I don't know about, I don't think even China has got that, has got a lot of capabilities up at the geosynchronous, meaning 25, 26,000 kilometers up in space. Okay, and the Chinese have been conducting tests, which they claim that, you know, they said we just sent up a sounding rocket or something, but the point is to send up a rocket to those altitudes, because they have these steering sensors from there. They're just looking at what is happening here. So as I said, the US being the leading space power, to some extent they have already taken into account these Chinese and Russian capabilities. But then this is an evolving thing. This is the constant struggle that is going on.
Right.
And so, as I said, one is the deterrence part of it. So the other guy knows that you can also knock out his facilities. Obviously, he's going to be careful.
Right.
But the second is the resilience part of it. Do you have the ability to replace those satellites in quick order?
Obviously, because when
when you're
capacity to pass information is destroyed, there is a blank area where the
so now what is the level of resilience you have? And that is why you see, you look at America for a long time, their launch capabilities had declined. Now with a lot of private sector players that have come up in the US, once again their launch capability is reaching a point where there's a lot of diversification. So if one is not available, the second can be available. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever you do in space has to have a combination of these things. So the deterrence, resilience, you know, they both combine in a kind of a counter space concept?
Well, very interesting, because it establishes that there is still a huge gap between America's capabilities and that of its nearest adversaries, the Russians and the Chinese. But General Pannu, American Vice President Kamala Harris has recently made an announcement that concerns that intelligence agencies can gain from the surveillance, reconnaissance and intelligence gathering ISR capabilities that space can provide in their conduct of future operations. I'm given to understand that she was referring to the situation in Ukraine and how Russia can use that. So, as Dr. Joshi just brought out, if America has these enormous capabilities, is there the ability to blank out what Russia could do by ISR, intelligence gathering, and facilitating its operations?
Actually, Dr. Joshi made a very interesting remark, but I will talk about the ISR and then come to what he's saying and link it up. As I spoke about the ultimate high ground, you can see, and what you can see, you can neutralize. But how better can you see is the resolution, game of resolution. The LEO and MEO, that the low Earth orbit and the medium Earth orbit, are the satellites which give you a better resolution because the proximity to Earth's surface is better. And not the geosynchronous, which is 32,000 kilometers away. But having said that, today, certain countries which have sub-metric resolution, only they can recognize and they can identify and they can neutralize. If you cannot recognize, you cannot neutralize. So as a result, the number of constellations that need to be thrown up for that kind of a resolution and that kind of a ISR are humongous in the LEO and MEO. Not only for communications, as the Starlink and the other SpaceX are trying to achieve, but also for huge amount of resolution for recce, and then for surveillance, and then later on for target acquisition. But what Dr. Joshi has been talking about is that the movement, because of the ASAT or the counter space technologies which are being put to use through proximity attacks or through direct attacks, kinetic or otherwise, you can be blacked out. And if that happens, what you need is launch on demand. And launch on demand is something like within 24 hours to 48 hours, you need to repair your entire ecosystem. And unless you have the rapid launch systems for relaunch with a quick turnaround for reusable rockets, which India needs to very heavily invest in. And also we have the fortune of being located closer to the equator, and we have Indian Ocean. And I think what is important here is, A, we create a smart frontier for ISR ourselves, which is both on the borders as also from the space, so that you are all the time having the kind of resolution and knowledge of what is coming against you. But also you need to have a sea launch capability, a rapid launch capability, which can repair the damages done for the ISR and for communication. I think this is the key in where India needs to very heavily invest and very quickly invest.
Oh, interesting. I hope somebody is listening, because I think we need to, and Dr. Joshi is an old commentator on how much money should go where as part of our defense budgeting. But I think there needs to be a little more emphasis on force multiplication than just meeting our day-to-day crisis agenda. But Dr. Joshi, sir, they say that one of the underlying reasons for the current state of competition in space, particularly with reference to Asia, is the changing dynamics of Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific security, which has energized China into getting into that space more aggressively. This is obviously causing concern with Japan, which is also planning to get into some of its own demonstration of capabilities, and Japanese are no pushovers when it comes to technology. And of course, India may need to revisit some of its positions vis-a-vis how far we are willing to tolerate what China is doing. Your views?
The thing is that for a long time, India used to keep the ISRO and the DRDO and all these as separate. It was under the belief that this is doing a peaceful program, so it will not be embargoed. But when the embargoes came, the MTCR and all this came, they covered all the areas. meaning civilian and military. So I think that setting up a military space agency is long overdue. Meaning, just to set up an agency right now, not good enough. You need a regular, full-fledged setup.
Space Command.
Space Command. You need a Space Command. The problem, of course, as you have pointed out, is the question of budgets. When a large proportion of your army is strung out along a line of actual control or a line of control, and it is manpower intensive, it consumes a lot of money.
Yep.
And we've seen the last 4 or 5 years the pressure that the defense budget is already in. So to say that now we should spend even more money. So, this is something which you need to think long and hard as to what you're going to ask your military to do. That should you completely get your military out of border guarding and function like a regular military and try to work budgets that way. Because no matter what you say, the space business is costly business.
And also there is a lot of overlap in duties and responsibilities. So the border guarding is a term you brought out, but so is the BSF also doing, and many of their charters are kind of replication of the Army's charters in the same area. So because you've created an agency, you then want them to have a role, and then therefore...
the point is you need to do something to be able to maximize the capital expenditure. Because just like Navy and Air Force, space is a capital intensive business. You've got to put in a lot of capital into it.
Okay, so General Pannu, last question for you. I mean, having been Deputy Chief of Integrated Staff Headquarters, you would have looked at a lot of these issues and the debates that go into money to be allocated for whatever initiatives there are. The question is that there has always been that long-standing concern that there is not enough money for capital expenditure because too much, maybe 87%, as some people would say, at least in the case of the Army, that goes into revenue expenditure. Now, you may take initiatives and bring 87% down to 80%, but still, revenue expenditure, outgoing on salaries, maintenance, infrastructure is enough. Now, the issue is that what from the top of your head could be the 3 or 4 quick initiatives that can be considered and examined that that's the direction we need to move at within our limited budgets?
I think it's good fortune that what Dr. Joshi is saying and what I'm saying is creating more of a chorus in discussion. He spoke about the border guarding forces, and we are speaking of also technology at the same time. I think the boots on ground is a thing of the past as far as the defense of the nation is concerned. You need some rapid reaction forces, and you need special forces, and you need good reaction for deterrence. But I think what we need to do is we need to translate the whole thing to technology by having smart frontiers, which is 360-degree dome architecture, which is given large chunk of money only for technology, for ICT, for smart sensors all around, and then reduce the strength on border guarding, but create the same brute force into a strike force, where you need to actually create a deterrence through a strike element. I'm not calling it a core or something like that.
Having raised one of the strike divisions, you know what you're talking about.
At the same time, when you speak about the agencies and the command, where the command space, you should have a space command or a cyber command. Actually, the original design, which was proposed by the armed forces, is to have a space command, a cyber command, and a special operations command. But I think government decided, because of budgetary constraint, we will only start with a 2-star heading, an agency of space, an agency of cyber, and also a division for special forces. If we create these as commands, I think the boots on ground to defend should reduce, and I think largely the industry must come in with the indigenous capability to take that money, which is result out of the saving that we are talking about, and bring in spectrum and processes and policies on offsets and empowering the industry to give all that is required for the armed forces to develop a defense industrial complex where largely we are export oriented and earning money from the defense exports and then giving it to the defense ministry for defense budget. And I think that is a cycle in which we need to not only save but also transform from boots to technology, from imports to exports, earnings to spending and bringing our defense budgets from our own earning. And I think that transformation is extremely important.
Well, very comprehensive and a lot of ideas thrown up. My humble suggestion would be that you should quickly pen an article before somebody takes the steam away from your argument on these bullet points, that what needs to be done in double quick time if India is going to be anywhere near getting to its nearest rival, that is China, in terms of at least protecting our space, which means the territorial space of India through the use of space by our adversaries. There are a lot of good points that have been thrown up. The need to have the space silo as one of the verticals within the Ministry of Defense or the armed forces. There is a need for more money to be brought in, and one way it can come in is by giving the industry to play a chance to play a bigger role, and therefore they will then make an investment. Just to say that you invest for the protection of India without them having anything to show on their profit margins is going to be difficult to convince. And finally, and most importantly, the recognition that future wars are going to be wars which will require us to realign our forces and restructure the existing elements which do give you a sense of comfort. But I think the debate needs to shift from there into the future, and the future is in the space. Thank you very much, sir, for your wisdom and your brilliant insights, and I hope you all have also enjoyed the show. Until our next episode, goodbye.